Welcome to episode 3 of Purvis Versus. This is another episode of my Mythbusting series. In a few moments, you'll meet Lauren, who is an RMT in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Lauren and I discussed her journey into busting popular and unhelpful myths, and she tells us how she uses Instagram as a tool to communicate with her clients, but also as a way to communicate more helpful and more evidence-based messages to the RMT population. Lauren quickly realized that the beliefs and techniques she learned in school were not working the way she was led to believe, and this motivated her to start researching and trying to find answers, different answers, because she wanted more accurate knowledge to better inform what she was experiencing in the clinic. If you'd like to get in touch with Lauren, she can be contacted through her Instagram account under the name Grounded Massage Therapy. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Please share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you for listening. Well, hi, Lauren. Thanks for being here today on my podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to be with me here today and to all the listeners. I know we don't really know each other, but this is really the first time we've ever chatted, or first time I've ever chatted in person. I know we've messaged back and forth on Instagram before. But yeah, the reason I reached out to you, I guess it was probably a few weeks ago now, was I was really interested by the videos you had put out on your Instagram page doing some myth busting. And that really kind of piqued my interest. I was like, well, this is somebody that would be perfect for this kind of series of episodes. And the one that I first noticed that really caught my attention was the one with you kind of dancing down the hallway saying massage doesn't have to hurt to be effective. That was the one. And, I kind of went through your feed and I saw you had another one when you were dancing on your massage table to Pharrell Williams, and kind of same thing about massage doesn't need to hurt. And I thought those were great. So I was really happy to see that somebody else out there was kind of challenging some of these narratives, these beliefs they're very common in our profession. So we're going to explore a little bit more about that today in terms of, your motivation and why you're doing it and some of the other content you're putting out. But before we start, I guess I just would like you to tell us a little bit about Lauren and tell the audience who you are and where you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you like the videos. I'm trying to make them kind of like lighthearted and fun and not so, in your face. Well, I am from Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I actually studied massage therapy in Ontario. So I graduated in 2016, and then I moved back to Fredericton to start doing massage there. And I kind of got thrown into a position where I was working with mostly veterans in my practice. And I noticed right away that a lot of what I was doing, a lot of what I was taught wasn't really working, especially with this particular type of people. So that's kind of what got me off, let's say, the path there, and started studying more about chronic pain and trauma and the nervous system, and just kind of exploring different ways to approach it. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, the veterans, working with veterans can actually be pretty profound, hey, because of the events actually that often will have led them to seeing you doesn't really add up when you look at what we learn as in our kind of core education, and then you see somebody like that and you think this doesn't make any sense. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and the program that I was thrown into at my first job was called Working on Wellness, and it was a multidisciplinary approach to PTSD. So it was basically you would get massage therapy, you would get dietary advice, there was physio, there was exercise, and I just noticed that whatever I was doing wasn't the puzzle wasn't fitting together. All of the techniques that I had been taught were not really working. So then I decided that I was going to try to switch off and find different approaches, and that's when I started studying craniosacral therapy. But I started studying craniosacral therapy, and then I thought, you know what, this is kind of too far in the direction. So then I just started becoming really skeptical of everything, and kind of started, really doing more research on my own and trying to figure out where is my niche going to be in this, and how am I going to be able to create a practice that's effective for people dealing with chronic pain.
What did you find about the craniosacral? Did you find it was a little too like you said, it was too far in one direction, like it was too wooey. Is that what you?
Yeah, I don't think it's too wooey because I really do believe in it, and I do think there is like a lot of there's definitely something really profound in it. Started noticing with craniosacral therapy was that there wasn't enough regulation or education around it, and there definitely wasn't like a trauma informed piece to it. And I think that is the biggest part of what I started noticing in my own practice and in like different courses I was taking. There just didn't seem to be trauma informed care. There didn't seem to be an approach that looked at the whole person. It seemed to be quite reductionist in most of the techniques. So yeah, what I started finding was most effective was really sitting down, having conversations with people about where they're at, and looking at the person and their life and where they are specifically in their healing journey, and creating a connection, creating an environment, and working with them from that angle, as opposed to saying like, here's what I know, here's what works for you, here's how we're going to do this, kind of putting the client in the seat.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. The particularly working with that population, right? The whole like trauma informed care is a kind of like a term. I hate to use the word buzzword, but it's a thing you're starting to hear more and more and more about, and the importance of it. So I think it's something that I would love it to be something that is kind of making its way into our kind of general lexicon and understanding and education, so people realize like how trauma impacts overall human makes such a big difference. Yeah, so that's great that you're able to see that, and particularly with veterans. I worked with a lot of veterans too in my practice, and the PTSD and the trauma that they went through was quite profound, and no wonder why they're not living their full life the way they want to, and they're suffering. So that's great.
Yeah,
that you're able
and
to
we're learning more. Like that, it's kind of a buzzword, but we're learning more about trauma, and they have like the capital T and the tiny t trauma, or little t trauma. And I think when we think of the word trauma, we think of the veteran, we think of the soldier, but as we're learning now, trauma isn't so much about, it doesn't necessarily have to be these huge, big life events that are so traumatic. I mean, oftentimes it is, but other times, trauma is just a dysregulated nervous system. And that's pretty common among the population, especially in the world we live in today. And we're just seeing that more often, I think, than we realize when we're looking at the average person. And I think it needs to be more trauma-informed care across the board when it comes to massage therapy in general.
For sure. And I would agree with you 100% there with that as well, that, when you're dealing with a human, you have to have the information, you have to have the knowledge and skills in order to, interact with them in a way that is going to be in their best interest.
Yeah,
which is great. Yeah, I don't know. I've seen a lot of people talk about trauma informed care, but I don't know if I've seen anybody that is actually like. I don't think I've seen any courses being offered on it. I could be wrong.
No, I would love to see a course offered on it. It's like especially tailored to healthcare professionals, like physiotherapists, massage therapists. Like it would be nice if it was more commonplace. I'm really fortunate because one of your friends is a master's of social work, and she owns a counseling business here in the city. So I kind of go to her for just to bounce ideas off of and make sure that I'm, ethically sound in what I'm putting out there and how I'm doing it. So, yeah.
That's a great resource to have for you. That's great. Yeah. That's good. I guess, one thing, before I would love to get into the theme of this is we're going to kind of talk about some of the skepticism and myth busting, which we've kind of already touched on, which is great. But you were talking about when you started off by saying that, the things you learned in school didn't really make sense anymore in terms of when you were working with this population. I guess my question would be is like, tell me a little bit more about your experience as an RMT student. Like what kind of gaps now, looking back, you said you've been practicing for 7 years. What kind of gaps did you see in the educational program that you feel, other than trauma-informed practice, I guess, that you feel we're missing?
Yeah, I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but trauma-informed care, obviously.
Obviously.
I think, well, in my program, I went to Sutherland Chan and School and Teaching Clinic in Toronto, Ontario, and they did a really, really heavy focus on like the science, which I really appreciate, and it is so important as a massage therapist to have such a strong foundation in science, anatomy, disease, all the different types of ailments that can come upon us. But what we didn't get a lot of experience in was just the day-to-day human interaction. We had one class, I forget what it was called. I think it was called Therapeutic Relationships. And we would all kind of go in there and we would have these mock interactions that you might have with like a client. And it was more around ethics and boundaries, I think, but had that class been maybe more tailored to real problems that you might encounter, I think maybe that would have been helpful. Because I did feel like I was kind of thrown out into the field after I graduated. I mean, mind you, that might have been because I got thrown into working strictly with veterans. But I just didn't feel like I was properly equipped in terms of the more like relational aspect of it. You know what I mean? Like the more building rapport with clients and kind of getting to know the client more. It was more just about the science. It wasn't so much about work with someone,
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it sounds, heavily focused on the science. And I would say, so you're learning all the anatomy, the physiology, your different pathologies, your techniques, your interventions, and you're looking at the person as a series of body parts rather than looking at the person.
Yeah. And I don't want to say that we didn't get that kind of education, because I remember over and over again, one of my teachers kept saying, whenever there was a question, the teacher would always have the same answer. It depends. It depends. It depends. It's always going to be different. It's always going to be unique. So they did, there's only so much they can do because nothing can really prepare you for real life. But I think had the focus just been a little bit more on dealing with people, then I would have felt better equipped. And I mean, this was 7 years ago, and that doesn't seem like very long ago, but there have been leaps and bounds in research since then. So, maybe we're just working with what they had at the time.
Yeah. That's the thing too.
I wonder if the program's changed.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar. I wouldn't know what they're doing there in Toronto, but I'm sure. It really depends. Though, a lot of times it depends on the instructors. It depends on who you get, and it depends on what their motivations are in terms of what their knowledge base. Yeah, I never want to throw on any of the schools or educators under the bus, because I always believe that people are doing the best knowledge that they have. But sometimes though too, the reason I like to ask these questions is because I think it does draw a general story that most of us, if we went to school, like I went to school almost 20 years ago versus 7 years ago versus people that are still in school now or just graduating, there is a lack of, I think, preparing us for the complexities of clinical practice, and I think,
which is a big ask anyway.
It's a big ask. Yeah. And I think, if we don't have these conversations, if we don't say these things, we don't ask for them, we don't, people listen to this and make a bit of a call to action, then the things don't change, right? If you just stick with the status quo, then nothing's going to change. And we always want to try and be less wrong. We always want to try and be moving forward as much as we can, and changing is to do. So
I actually, there was when I was just reading up on your webpage before doing this, and I looked up some papers that you had done, and I noticed that one of the names on the paper that you wrote was actually one of my teachers. And she had taught, I forget what the name of the class was, but it was very much one of those classes where it was very controversial. The students were kind of like, oh, I don't know if this is what we should be learning. But I do think it was really important. It was kind of more philosophical and got everybody thinking outside the box. And I think the only reason it was controversial at the time was because, like I said, the course was really, the program was really heavily weighted in science and more like anatomy and all that. So yeah.
Yeah. That would be
growing.
Monica Noy, I'm sure.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. No, I've known Monica for a long time. She's great. Her and I used to teach.
Yeah.
We taught a couple, 2 or 3 Con Ed courses together in Toronto. Probably about
I loved her class.
6 or 7 years ago, actually. Yeah. Monica's great. She's great, and I think she's a very, very smart person. So yeah, you're very lucky to have her.
I really, really loved her. Yeah, I liked her class.
So I guess one thing too, just kind of just not to beat this to death with the school stuff, but one thing I'd be curious to know is oftentimes what ends up happening, at least, and this is just my experience, is when people kind of get into practice and they start doing content out there, kind of like busting some myths or kind of doing some educational stuff, which might go against the status quo. I'm always curious about, is that, was that something that you ever introduced to in school? Like, were you ever introduced to be skeptical or to think critically, or is it something that came afterwards for you?
I don't remember being encouraged to think that way in school. I think I've always been a huge skeptic, naturally. Even when I was in massage therapy school, I mean, I've grown a lot since then, but we had an introduction to craniosacral class, and I remember kind of rolling my eyes and thinking, oh man, or whenever, in massage therapy school, you tend to see a large spectrum of people. You tend to see people who are more like sports, rehab, blah, 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 and then you tend to see the more people who are more like the energy side of things and the more holistic side of things. And I always sat really where in the middle, because I think they're both super beneficial. But I think I've always been really skeptical, and I don't remember that being something that we really talked about in school.
No. Yeah.
Or were taught at all in school, really, now that you mentioned it. Like I said, just the only course where that would have been even on the table or where would have been encouraged was that class that I took with Monica. And I remember that class being kind of tense. There was a lot of debates and, people, so maybe that's why at the time it wasn't taught, because it's kind of tricky, right? So
yeah. I'm always very encouraged when I meet instructors in the educational system that are introducing that stuff, because I think it is important. Because if we just believe everything we're told, then we just never really learn to think for ourselves. So I think it is important, but I do understand the difficulty with it, because if you are in school and you are, you're focused on just passing your exams and passing your boards and getting out there working in the public, and then someone is there throwing some philosophy at you or throwing some kind of critical analysis of the information and asking you to be skeptical, then that really what that makes you do is it makes you challenge everything that you think you know. And that can be very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're a student and you just don't have that base of knowledge yet to really think, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're in that position too, like when you're a student, you're in a very vulnerable position. I don't know if you remember massage therapy school, but it is kind of intense. And, you're just trying to get everything together. You put the puzzle together. You're trying to get everything, in order in your brain. And then if someone comes in and starts, like you said, just shaking everything up, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around when you're already having a hard time wrapping your head around the whole concept to begin with. Yeah.
My memory of massage school was basically they just fire hose you in the face with information, and then you don't have enough time to really integrate it. And you're in school all day, every day, and then they kind of throw you in the public clinic, and then the stuff in the public clinic, I remember, didn't really add up with the things that we were learning in school, because everyone was different, and it was hard. And I think if I go back and reflect on my own experiences in school, the things that I would love for people to be taught, I think would be very difficult in the current system. Like, I think you would need to reconfigure, recalibrate a lot of how the education is structured, and probably maybe make it a little bit longer, or maybe there's certain stuff you get rid of, and you add more of that kind of interpersonal, that kind of person-centered kind of care lens, and dealing with humans and understanding trauma and all these things, and less focus on all the various modalities with their stories, and more on like, how do I work with a human, I think would be more beneficial.
Mhm.
My
I
grand,
agree. I feel like there was so much. I remember we learned so much on different types of diseases and how that affects the body and how that impacts the body. And I remember it being really fascinating and really educational. But then at the end of the day, it was like, okay, so how do we treat this? And the outline was always very similar. And I remember thinking, this is really great, and I'm glad that I have that knowledge now because it is useful in the field. But like I said before, it just would have been nice if we had done more interpersonal, like client-centered care, as opposed to like the nitty-gritty of the biology and stuff.
for sure. Yeah,
Or
yeah,
maybe both. Maybe both would be better.
yeah, yeah. But I think both would be great. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
ideal. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
an ideal world, right? We can
Yeah.
always pretend we have this ideal world, and we can create a curriculum that would make us even better.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you had kind of when you went to work and you were seeing these veterans and you were in these kind of multidisciplinary approaches to PSD type clinics, and you said that things didn't make sense or things didn't really add up. Can you be a little more? Can you go a little bit more specific about that? Like some of the things that didn't add up, like what was not making sense to you?
Well, I was, fresh out of school, so I was just using all my basic techniques, um, and the body wasn't responding to them. Like uh, anything other than very superficial, relaxing touch was creating more dysfunction in the client on average. I mean, not across the board. I'm thinking broadly here, but I noticed specifically with PTSD, and not just veterans, but those reporting to have PTSD, or high anxiety, mental health, stress, anything where the person appeared to be highly agitated or anxious, anything other than a superficial approach was not working. So like I'm talking, even just moving the neck, or even just doing gentle stretching or any type of muscle engagement. So that's kind of how I veered into craniosacral, because I was like, I need lighter touch therapies to help these people. Like this is whatever I'm trying here isn't working. Yeah, so then I just started to question everything I was taught. But then I noticed there were certain cases that those techniques do work on, but definitely not with chronic, well, I should say dysregulated nervous system is how I usually refer to it, because I mean, it can be many different things that create that. So yeah, the lighter techniques is what I noticed started making an impact. And what I noticed is that after, it took a lot longer, in school they teach you, 6 weeks, make a treatment plan, da 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 da. Treatment plans are out the window. Those frames do not work with this particular clientele at all. So I just started using very light touch therapy and just focusing more on creating safety and trust between me and the client. And only after, when they're ready, which can be anywhere from a year to 2 years, honestly. I mean, it can be less than that too, depending on the person. But only when we've got safety and trust and good rapport are we able to actually start integrating some of the techniques that I learned in school, which blew my mind. Because I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, I'm such a terrible massage therapist. Like none of these people are responding to any of the things I learned. Like it was kind of a little bit of a crisis for me, right out the gate. But as I learned more about it, I kind of started to be like, okay, no, this is actually helping. It's just the timeline is very different than what I was taught, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you can have it. Oftentimes people can have that crisis of like, I'm terrible. I'm the worst therapist there is. I don't know what I'm doing. And that's one way. Or
Yeah.
sometimes it can go the other way too, where I've heard stories of where therapists, like they start blaming the person, right? They're like, well, it's like they start blaming the patient, right? And that's even worse. But
yeah, I really have no patience for that. I really don't like that. That stresses me out. But yeah, I think it's just a rite of passage as a massage therapist to think that you're terrible at your job at one point.
I think so. I think you have to be. If you don't have that humility that you're like, yeah, I suck.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
never going to work for you.
You leave that
that's
treatment and you're like,
yeah, but that's really interesting. I mean, that you noticed that, the lighter was better more often, like kind of doing the typical kind of, what we learn in school, massage techniques, weren't really weren't making much of a difference. And then I would say too that probably, and tell me if I'm wrong, but probably the reason was because you were less focused on the person, you're more focused on like the tissues you were working.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was treating it like, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, so yeah, you end up like, you start to see better outcomes, or the person is experiencing better outcomes. And then when you start focusing more on them as the human and what do they need here today versus a piece of meat that I'm just going to do these things to.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So
that's what.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Lauren. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's what led me into the craniosacral world, which was very different from what I learned in school. It was completely opposite everything I ever learned in school, basically. And I remember thinking, how is this a modality? But but I did find it to be super effective with the veterans specifically.
Yeah. Because you're holding that safe space for them, giving them touch that was soothing rather than aggressive or whatnot. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So you went through this journey, and you saw the stuff that wasn't making sense, and you went and kind of sought some lighter touch kind of interventions, and you started to see that people were getting better. You start to realize that like these kind of 6, 8, 12-week treatment plans don't make sense for people with chronic conditions because they're chronic, which means they stick around for a long time or they don't get better. Hopefully they do. Now they stick around for a long time. So when you started, and I think off air, you said that you started creating your Instagram account in April of 2022. What was kind of your motivation for starting to put some of that myth busting stuff on there?
I just don't see very much of that in my city. I live in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and we do have a lot of rehab centers here, and we have a lot of massage therapists here. Don't see, and again, bringing back the trauma-informed care, I just don't see much trauma-informed care here. And I've gone to a lot of different massage therapists in the city, and I've had great treatments, but I'm not, for some of us who are really sensitive or really nervous to be touched, I just wanted to create a space that people feel comfortable walking into if they have any trepidation or anxious or scared about it, because I do know how powerful touch can be, not only for injuries or chronic pain, but, for mental health as well. And I think I know mental health is a huge contributor to chronic pain. And oftentimes people don't make that connection. So I kind of want to create a space that broadens the horizons of what massage therapy can do. Because, when you think of massage therapy, oftentimes we think of, just gentle, soothing, kind of the spa, or we think of, the sports rehab. And I just wanted to create something that was kind of in the middle that incorporates both pieces where, yes, we can help you, but we're also going to make sure it's really safe and you feel really good here. So that was kind of my goal. And I also wanted it to be very educational.
Nice. So your
bust massage therapy out of its box.
Yeah, no, that's great, right? Because I think massage therapy itself is oftentimes thought of as just a series of modalities that we do rather than like a profession where we can help a wide range of people using a variety of different strategies.
Yeah, and oftentimes when I tell people, about certain things that a therapist can do, for example, abdominal massage or jaw massage, if you're clenching your jaw, like things that people wouldn't think about, or call babies, like, oh, I didn't even think of that. It's just nice to have a place where I can spread the word a little bit more readily.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it's your own platform, so you can do whatever the hell you want.
I do like that.
Yeah, which is great, right? Which is great. So one thing I'm curious about is because you said that there wasn't a lot of people, really talking about that kind of stuff there, and you want to kind of break massage out of its box. What's the RMT culture like in New Brunswick? Like, is it pretty mainstream, or is it still kind of viewed as this like fringe or alternative profession?
That is a really good question. I don't know if I can speak to the culture here just because all I have is my own perspective, but
It's just your
from
perspective.
what,
Yeah.
yeah, from what I see, like, I mean, like I said, I went to school in Toronto and then I moved back here, so um, I don't have a lot of huge network of RMTs that I know here. But yeah, it seems to be more mainstream. It definitely seems to be more, like I said earlier, there's either the spa kind of relaxation, or there's the sports massage, like injury type deal. But now that I say that, I do know a few massage therapists in the city that are more into the holistic kind of, um, but that tends to be more into like the energy work type deal.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I would have to say it typically tends to be more mainstream here.
That's good. And you guys are regulated there now too, which probably helps because you have, one of the
Yeah,
regulated provinces.
and we were only regulated, I believe, in 2016. It might have been 2015. But it's fairly new, right? So I think we're still kind of struggling to find our place there, and we're still trying to kind of, I mean, all massage therapists in Canada are still trying to fight for their right to be respected as health professionals, but it's still new. There's a lot of RMPs here that were grandfathered in, so it's kind of a hodgepodge, I guess you could say. Different types of massage therapy approaches.
Yeah, and that's to be expected too, right? When you have like a relatively new college that comes in, and the standards of what people are educated with and what their continuing education requirements are, professional development requirements, are going to be different, right? Particularly for somebody that was educated a long time ago, they probably come from a certain way versus people that are now are going to come from a certain kind of educational background. So yeah, I could see that it would be, you'd have a wide range of people, which can be good or bad, because the way I always see it is, of course, you need different flavors. You want to have people on both ends of the spectrum and then people in the middle, right? Because there's going to be a need for the holistic, like the kind of more spa energy stuff. People like that. Some people like that, like, sport, orthopedic, that type of approach. The thing that I would always like to see, it doesn't matter where you are, is if the base of knowledge at least had some similarity in terms of like, what does massage do? What is the, trauma-informed care, evidence-based practice, understanding pain and understanding like biopsychosocial influences. I mean, as if there was that base of knowledge, and then people could take that base of knowledge and be like, okay, I understand this, so but then they can go to one extreme or the other if they want to, as long as they came from that base of knowledge. What I tend to find though is that base of knowledge is not consistent. It's kind of all over the place. And I know my experience teaching in New Brunswick was not as good as it has been in other provinces. And I had more pushback and more backlash teaching stuff that challenged the status quo in New Brunswick than I ever have anywhere else in the world.
Wow. I find that really interesting.
Yeah.
I do see a lot of very differing ideologies. Like you said, did a really good job of describing like the different foundations that we come from. And I do see that a lot for sure.
Yeah.
And New Brunswick is known for being a little bit like that. Kind of, they like what they know. So, I can see that you would get backlash here. I haven't actually had any backlash though, so I like to think we're evolving. But I mean, I didn't teach a course, so
yeah. No, that was actually one of the things I was curious about, was what kind of engagement, or what kind of feedback do you get from people? Are they like, yeah, keep doing this, or like, does anybody ever private message you and be like, what are you talking about? I don't have to beat people up. Like, what kind of things?
I actually have not received any backlash, which is surprising, because that was one of the reasons that I was like, I'm not gonna do this. Like, it's just I don't want to stir the pot, But then I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna I think this is important. I think people know that this is a service that they have access to in New Brunswick. So no, I've been receiving really great feedback. You know, a lot of words of encouragement, a lot of RMTs in the city even that I live in saying, you know, like, this is so great. I wish we did more of this, you know. So I do think that people are changing perspectives on massage therapy in general and healthcare in general. And I know trauma-informed care is such a buzzword these days, but it is so important. And I think it should be the new norm. And I feel like it's going to be the new norm eventually. Or at least I hope it is. So yeah. So yeah, I've been getting a lot of great feedback on it. So I think something we need, you know.
Yeah, which is great, because I think the more people that are kind of, you know, educating the public and educating the profession, clients, patients as well, I think the better off everyone's going to be, right? Because you know, I like the one you talked. I mean, the ones that I get that, you know, confirmed my kind of, I was like, oh, this is somebody that's I want to talk to, was the ones about it doesn't have to hurt to be effective, because that's a common narrative that, like, if someone's in pain, there's got to be something wrong in their tissues. So the only way to fix them in air quotes, is to beat them up and to hurt them. And we know that that's not necessarily the case in a lot of, particularly with chronic issues. You know, some people like hard touch, some people don't. But if that's your only go-to, then you might make people feel worse. And you probably saw that in your veterans. And I saw that in all my years of clinical practice as well, that if I took that same approach of just trying to hurt people, thinking I was doing them benefit, no, it didn't.
I know, been there.
So I think that's an important.
I would say that, you know, you asked me about backlash. The only backlash I ever received was from coworkers in multidisciplinary settings. And when I say backlash, I mean like healthy debate, you know, respectful conversation.
Yes.
That's what I can say. Like, I can think of a couple of physios I worked with, you know, who we were collaborating with this program, and they would say things like, oh, I don't believe in that, or I don't agree with that, or whatever. And then we'd have a little bit of like a back and forth about it. The only other backlash I would say I get is from clients, you know, like, if I had a penny for every time a client said, oh, you know, just give her, put all your weight on me, just hurt me, just go for it, go as deep as you want, you know, don't be afraid, like, no pain, no gain, I'd be a millionaire. So oftentimes before I even start my treatments, well, actually before I start all of my treatments, I sit down with my client, I talk to them, and, you know, I try to do a little bit of an education piece on why I don't think that is the most effective approach. And it took me a very long time to get confident with that little spiel, because, you know, you're a massage therapist, you want to make people feel better. And then there's also a business side to it, right? You want to make sure you're providing a service that people are asking for. So it's really hard to walk that line between, I want to give you what you want, but also I want you, and, you know, what you're asking for might not be the best way, and there are other ways we can get to it. So I try to explain to people that deep tissue massage, like, can be effective. You know, I'm not knocking it. I'm sure it works for some people. But, you know, with certain cases, I explain to them that deep tissue can come from light touch. We start light, your nervous system naturally relaxes, and then we can get to deeper tissues. It might not feel deep, but it is deep. And we are getting to structures that are, you know, deep tissue. We're just doing it from a place that your body is allowing us to, and we're not fighting through it. So you're not going to get that pain. But yeah, I could go on and on about the no pain, no gain.
Yeah, you please do. I mean, I think that's such an important thing. I mean, I know, like, for my own journey, like, coming from a very kind of like structurally focused background and very much into the sports and rehab stuff, then I did a complete like 180 and went the other way, you know, realizing that approach doesn't work for people that are really suffering. More often than not, that deeper, aggressive, grinding approach, and started to realize that, oh, I can touch people in a way that feels good for them. This is right. A term I always joke about when I teach my courses, I use the term TPN is the best technique, and that's to touch people nicely. Whatever feels good right? Whatever feels
Yeah,
good to the person is fine. And whether that's an elbow or whether that's light touch, whether it's just gently stretching the skin, maybe just holding a limb or a head or something, whatever feels
hmm,
good, that can't be wrong. Because how can one be wrong?
exactly.
Right. And so, yeah, the no pain, no
Yeah.
gain thing, I think is a big problem. And I'm always so curious where that comes from. I don't know. Do you have any idea where that comes from? This is something in society. I don't know.
Well, I work with a lot of military clients, and it is definitely a catchphrase. No pain, no gain. Pull up your bootstraps. Don't be a wuss. Like that whole mindset. I don't know where that comes from. I'm sure it's just like a toxic diet culture thing, maybe, or I don't know. Like you have to push through pain to be worthy, or I don't know. I totally disagree with all of it. But yeah, I think also there is research when you look at like trauma informed care again. Your body gets addicted to what it's used to, whether it's good or bad. So even if it feels good, it might not feel safe. So for veterans, they're used to being dysregulated. Their body is used to that, so that's what feels more unsafe. That's their baseline. So the pain kind of releases all those chemicals in the brain that say, okay, this is our normal. So it sort of starts this cycle where that's what I need to feel normal. And sometimes, PPN, that kind of approach makes them feel unsafe. So there is kind of like a big education piece that needs to be incorporated into, saying like, listen, when your body is relaxed, it's okay. You can be safe here. You can relax here in this. So yeah, I don't love the no pain, no gain.
No, no. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it either. And I like how you've talked a lot too
Mm-hmm.
about education and educating people, right? Because I think that's probably, in my opinion, that is the most important piece is the education we provide and the understanding that people provide. And I have a friend of mine, a colleague here in Victoria, and he said he calls education a modality. He's like, education is the most important modality, and I like that because
Ooh, I
it's
love that.
yeah, it's great because you're like, yeah, I'm providing, that's probably the most powerful part of the treatment is having people have at least understand. And then it allows you, like you were saying, to provide touch or an intervention or movement or whatever it is that you're doing with that person on that day. It provides them some understanding about what it is that's going on and why. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel that, and you probably agree that results in better outcomes for that person because if they understand, then it makes sense.
Yeah, I find that was so a hard pitch coming right out of school because, like I said earlier, you're trying to walk that fine line between providing a service and also helping them. But I find when people come into my office and they sit down, they're kind of like, okay, cool. Like I'm giving them my spiel, and they're like, all right, like on the table. It's hard to bring people into that, and it's a hard modality to pitch. They'd
Yeah, of
rather get the massage.
course.
So it's
I think
tricky.
that's what
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
us so powerful as a profession, though, is that because we have so much time with people, right? So we can provide the
yeah.
massage, we can give them touch and stuff that feels good, but while we're doing that, we can also educate them. We talk to them or listen to them,
Mhm.
depending on what
Mhm.
they want, and that's so powerful. And I don't
Yeah, I think
think
that's
enough of us realize that the power is that the right word? Influence, I guess, the impact that we could have just by
mhm.
holding that safe space and listening and being with somebody and providing a touch that they want and that they expect and that we like to give. It's so powerful, but that is not a common thing that people don't leave school feeling that. I don't think. Like I've talked to so many
No.
new therapists over the years and people that are still students and even people been practicing for a long time. They're like, yeah, I never learned that in school. I had to figure that out on my own, or I took a course and I
Yeah.
figured that out. Right. So it's a gap.
Yeah. It is really, I think, kind of I don't want to say the upper hand, but it's kind of like a real huge advantage is the amount of time we get with people. Because other healthcare modalities, they don't have that. I think the only other comparable modality, like counseling or therapy. Um, Well, no, that's not true. There's all kinds of other things that are hour-long treatments. But it's just like you said, we are in a position where we can have such a huge impact, and where we really have enough time and space to build like meaningful connections with people and allow them to feel safe. You know, not just because we're spending so much time with them, but because it's very vulnerable to get a massage, you know, especially if you have a history of trauma and you have complicated relationships with touch, or, you know, you've been through whatever. I find being able, like, not to sound too much here, but it is kind of an honor to be trusted with someone like that. You know, like, it is a really sacred space, and it does. Yeah, we do have a position where we need to be really careful with what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I couldn't agree more. So I guess one of the things I wanted to find out, I guess, from you would be, other than trauma-informed care, what other, and obviously the no pain, no gain stuff. Do you have any other, like, kind of educational or kind of like myth busting type things that you have planned that you're going to be putting up on your Instagram?
Geez, I don't know. I can't think of any right now. I mean, there's so much to it, right? That pretty much encompasses most of it.
Yeah.
You know, those are wide umbrellas: trauma-informed care and no pain, no gain. You know, there's a lot under there.
Yeah, but I mean,
but those are my two.
From going through your stuff, I mean, that's the theme I see again and again and again. So I think, and you've done such a good job of putting that information out there, and you've got quite a few followers. You got 1,100 followers or something. Like, it's not like it's not like a tiny account. So you're making a difference, and I see a lot of other.
Thank you. I would call that tiny.
You would call that tiny?
I guess, I don't know, relatively speaking, but I don't know.
It depends on what you're comparing it to.
Yeah, I guess, eh? Yeah. The other thing that I'm pretty weary about putting it out there is, I do have, you know, a big part of my practice is craniosacral therapy and somatics, and I don't put a lot of that online because there isn't enough research there right now, and I don't want to, you know, I'm really big on safety, so I don't want to put anything out there that might not be, you know, well-founded in research. But I have to say that with craniosacral therapy and somatic work, I have seen a lot of profound changes in people with PTSD, or any form of mental health issue. And I would like to see more research on that. So that might be a myth I bust down the road, but I mean, I'm still just kind of treading lightly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you. Yeah. No, I think it's really important stuff. And, you know, the way I always look at these things is that even if you have a big following or a small following, you know, if you're a small following, it'll grow, and, you know, those people are probably more engaged. And so I think that even if you're making a difference in your town, and it's only been 7 months, you know, it's going to start to grow, start to spread. And hopefully your voice will be heard by many people on after this podcast or when this podcast is released. And it's another medium of getting your information and your voice out there. So I hope it continues to grow, and I hope you keep putting out good content. And I look forward to seeing what you put out there and what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Lauren, for being here today. We'll keep in touch. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe so you can be notified of future episodes. Purvis Versus is available or will soon be available on all the major podcast directories. If you enjoyed this episode, please share on all your social media platforms. If you'd like to connect with me, I can be reached through my website, ericpurvis.com, or send me a DM through either Facebook or Instagram at ericpurvisrmt.